Thank you so much for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate, where we come together each day to introduce you to our network of business and community leaders and to discuss important issues that impact business in Colorado and the region. I'm Tammy Schaefer, your on-air producer, and today we're connecting with Dana Svendsen. She is an occupational safety and health attorney with Sherman Howard, and this is part of our focus this week on the mining industry here in Colorado. So Dana, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very optimistic about the potential for growth in the mining community, and I was really excited when you asked me to join for Mining Week. It's a good time to be mining in Colorado, and there are some important regulatory issues that we probably should discuss today.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting, just your title alone, the Occupational Safety and Health Attorney, definitely a lot to consider in the mining industry. Tell us first a little bit about your background. How did you get into working in mining as an attorney, and how'd you land here?
It was certainly a journey. I wouldn't say that I left high school and said I'm going to be an attorney for the mining industry,
Yeah.
But at first glance, I might not be what a person usually thinks about when they're thinking about mining. A female attorney, mid-30s, mother of 2 boys under 3. But I know here in Colorado, it's a dynamic industry full of great people, and I really would like to think of myself as a champion of mining.
Yeah.
I started attending law school while I was working for the Army Corps of Engineers as a civil engineer.
Really?
Yeah. And I was able to attend University of Denver in their part-time program in the evening. And I worked during the day at Buckley Air Force Base as a construction project engineer. And I was able to participate in the building of the Wing Commander facility and also the Child Development Center during the day, and then went to school for a few years at night. Met a lot of interesting people that were on the same path. And then I started to apply for some law jobs.
Yeah, so you well, I don't want to stress this too much, but you had an unconventional path going into engineering and then going into working in the mining industry in your law career. So we're glad to have you. We like seeing women in these great careers like this. That's a great great story and a good I think incentive, a good example for our young women. So you recently joined Sherman and Howard. Tell me a little bit about your career background. Again, how you went from engineering to mining.
Well, when I graduated with my engineering degree, I knew I was going to go work for the Army Corps of Engineers and work in a variety of areas. So they sent me through a 2-year training program, and it was a great opportunity. It's called the Department of the Army Internship Program.
Okay.
And so the 2-year program where you go through all areas of the Army Corps of Engineers and learn what the Army Corps does. And the area that really intrigued me was construction because it was very dynamic. And I had the ability to be out in the field and have a constantly changing environment and really feel like I was building something and adding to, what we needed to do as a country. So I was excited to be there.
That's fantastic. So then you went to law school, and how'd you get into mining from there? Because it wasn't necessarily what you set out to do.
No, it wasn't. I went to apply to work at a law firm called Jackson Kelly. And they had a basically an open associate position where I would help a variety of areas, including construction law, government contracts, and then there was this other occupational safety area. And I remember my first interview, I met a lady named Laura Beveridge, and she was telling me about her practice, her MSHA practice, and I said, MSHA? Do you mean OSHA? What is MSHA? And she calmly told me it is the Mine Safety and Health Administration, and they didn't hold it against me. They still hired me. I worked for a few months transferring through the various areas, and then Laura really took me under her wing, and 10 years later I am still practicing in the area of mine safety and health as well as occupational safety and health. Almost all workplaces are regulated by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
The OSHA that you
Yes.
knew and we all know,
Yes.
right?
Everyone knows who OSHA is. Not so many people know about MSHA, and that is
sure.
any mining site is regulated by a separate entity called the Mine Safety and Health Administration. So basically ended up there. Didn't quite plan it, but it's been a really good fit. I like it because I'm able to use my civil engineering background.
Sure.
And
Yeah, I'm sure
you know,
that's very useful in the work you're doing.
yeah, it's great, and I just love the people I'm working with. They're all very smart and know what they're doing, so it feels good to represent them.
So you started telling us a little bit about, the work you do, workplace safety. You've got OSHA, you've got MSHA. Tell me a little bit more of what your work looks like. Are you helping the mining industry to adhere to safety regulations, make sure they've got what they need, or they're defended in ways that they must be? Or tell us how your work plays out.
I think that's a great way to describe it. My work
It's an okay way to describe it. You can do better than that.
I'll try.
Thanks.
It is a workplace safety. It's all types of workplaces. My work would be distributed approximately 50-50, half OSHA, half MSHA. The OSHA work is primarily businesses in Colorado, and that would include a lot of oil and gas entities, or what you would think about as an industrial facility. Also, construction sites. There's a lot of OSHA activity on construction sites. And my MSHA work really takes me all over the country, pretty much any state. I've probably been there at least once to help a mine site. You would be surprised at how many different types of mines there are all over the United States. I think mining is one of those industries that really doesn't promote itself very well, and I think it's unfortunate because everyone's lives are touched by mining all the time.
Right. When you say the different kinds of resources we're mining, I think first we think of coal, for sure. I think that's at the top of your mind when you think of mining. But there's so many other resources, and they're definitely the resources we use every day without thinking about them.
Certainly. Something that comes to mind, and I know you're going to have another interview later this week with the Colorado Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association. It's the stone. It's the stone,
Right.
the sand, the gravel. It goes into our roads, our buildings, our infrastructure, and additional things that are mined. We have lots of mines in Colorado. I was just on the phone today with a safety lady who's working at Ure mine for silver. She's trying to get that mine up and running. There's also Freeport McMoran has the Climax molybdenum mine. We have Newmont, which has the Cripple Creek gold mine down near Cripple Creek. And we also have coal mines near Paonia, Colorado.
Yeah, and we know, I mean, I've heard this so many times, as I'm fortunate to be able to talk with so many people in so many different industries on this radio show. I mean, so many of the resources, like there's a lot of stuff inside the cell phone right here that I don't know if it's mine in Colorado, but they're definitely bringing those resources to the surface for us, aren't they?
Yes, they are. The rare earth minerals are a hot topic these days. Molycorp was based out of Denver here. They are now defunct, but they were a wonderful client. I used to love to visit their mine just close to the California border near Las Vegas. Many memories of that, and I hope that mine can get up and running again and run by American interests. That would be lovely.
That'd be, yeah, great. So mining does have, well, you mentioned that the mining industry hasn't done a lot in the way of public relations or getting their message out. And I think, or maybe the feeling is that it's been, that there's either too much opposition, or people think what they do is dirty or dangerous. But they're doing a lot of good. They're bringing us a lot of the materials that we definitely need. You said you've been all over the country working in the Mine Safety and Health Administration, the MSHA work that you do. Let's talk a little bit more about that importance of mining in Colorado and nationwide. Just what are we looking at, and what concerns are coming up when we talk about safety and regulation?
Well, I think a lot of people are not aware that every mine site in the United States is inspected top to bottom at least twice a year. And
Wow.
if it's an underground mine, that'll be 4 times a year. So that means the inspectors are very busy, and it's not a 1 hour visit. It's
Right.
for a lot of my clients, for larger facilities, especially when you're including a mill and a mine. The the regular inspection activity, a single inspection can take months.
Mm-hmm.
So larger facilities can have an MSHA inspector on their site for a significant portion of the year.
Really?
And the way that the Mine Act was written and they're implementing regulations, it is a strict liability statute, so there are not the typical defenses that you may have to, say, an OSHA enforcement. They're held to a very high standard, and
Right.
there's really not a lot that they can do to get out from underneath it. So it's an exciting area to practice.
So when you talk about mines being inspected and 4 times a year, and some of these, like you said, take months, what are they looking for? Safety. Safety is number one, I imagine, and that can be what they're working in there, what they're breathing in there, the possibility for combustion.
All of those things, yes. There's a regulation called 30 CFR, and that is where all of the regulations come from. They're different parts for different types of mining,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just looking for the standard safety concerns that one might have, and they would be chance of fire, keeping the workplace safe and
Mm-hmm.
inspected, keeping it clean, making sure there's no electrical hazards, no fall of material hazards, no problems with equipment. Also want to make sure that all the machinery is in good working order so that it will not malfunction and hurt somebody.
Right.
All the typical items that they might be looking for. I think when we start to talk about stuff like this, I might just be so close to it. So just back me up if I get too technical.
No, you're doing great, and you just led me to this question or perspective. Really, I don't think I've been in a mine. I've been in a cave, but I would imagine it's close quarters. So you've got machinery in there, you've got workers in there. If something goes wrong, they're impacted immediately.
Yes, and that is why a large portion of the mine's activity goes to maintaining an escape way in case there is an emergency, or figuring out how it would be reported if something unfortunate does happen. But very tight communication in all of these, in all of mining. They're always talking to each other on the radio. Your example of a cave is kind of apt.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in underground coal. You go into those mines, and on your way down to the working area, it's dark.
Yeah. You're relying on your equipment.
You are relying on and so you're relying on the truck that you're driving in on. And then once you get out of the truck, you have a headlamp,
Mm-hmm.
and you turn that on, and you learn really quick. I remember one of my first visits into the mine, I was told, you can't ever look anyone in the eye when you talk with them underground, because you need to point your lamp towards the ground so you don't blind them.
Oh.
There's all this etiquette that you need to learn as you
that's
go.
interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
It's like, why wouldn't you look them in the eye?
Yeah.
But then with the light, absolutely.
You'll blind
You're
them
staring
with
at each other. You're just going to go.
high intensity light.
That's very
so you
intense.
kind of look off to the side and you talk to them, and but yeah, once you get down to the working areas, there will be lights, and then you can turn off your headlamp.
Headlamp. Yeah. Yeah, I imagine those really close quarters in there, and machinery. Yeah, there's a lot of concerns. So you said there's a lot of serious and substantial workplace safety requirements for that industry. How do you help mining clients handle that MSHA enforcement? And when we say MSHA, that's a Mining Safety and Health Administration.
Well, one of my favorite things to do is to provide training. I provide a 2 to 4 hour, it's called Supervisory Rights and Responsibilities training.
Mm-hmm.
And that just kind of goes through, what to do if MSHA comes to your site, and how to gather evidence if you are on the wrong side of enforcement.
Mm.
And another focus of that is kind of a classroom type setting, is you want to get the individual frontline managers aware of their requirements under the Mine Act, because there's also Section 110 of the Mine Act that allows for individual civil penalties against people who are found to be agents.
Okay.
And agents would be anyone who's acting on behalf of the company if they knowingly allow a safety violation to happen. It doesn't even need to be correlated with a serious accident or injury, the fact that the condition existed and you knew about it and you had an unwarrantable failure to comply. In addition to citing the company, they will also cite individuals. That individual.
So it's not necessarily the impact resting on the company. It can rest on one person.
Yeah, exactly. And it gets those types of situations are very serious. So we try to prevent those. But if they do occur, if MSHA does decide to proceed and do that a special type of investigation for either a 110C, or if perhaps they're visiting your site because there was a fatality or a serious injury, or also there's discrimination claims that can be made, and I won't go into those, but when MSHA visits the site, I'm typically called by the company to come out and to kind of be the liaison during that investigation, so that it can go smoothly and we can make sure that they get documents and get to speak to the people they need to at the same time while preserving everyone's rights.
Well, and I'm going to ask for maybe a more concrete example, or do you have an example you can share? I know there's probably some caution there as an attorney. You don't want to get too specific, or give names.
Okay.
But when you talk about gathering evidence when it comes to enforcement or an inspection or that kind of thing, can you give us an example of what kind of violations might come up?
Well, one that comes to mind is I had a site client call a few years ago, and they had a fatality, and it was a driver, not their employee.
Oh,
a different company's employee was struck by a piece of equipment that was operated by their employee, and they knew that they had a fatality on their hands. They had to call MSHA within 15 minutes because that's what's required.
Okay.
But as soon as they finished calling MSHA, they called their corporate attorney, who in turn called me, and I had to get on a plane and go states over.
Wow.
And be ready for MSHA to show up and conduct their investigation. Once MSHA shows up, they want to speak to who they want to speak to and get the documents they want to get. There's also something called an accident control order. So you have to work with MSHA to figure out the parameters of the accident scene that need to be protected and investigated, and then MSHA will slowly release the accident control area, and so that will be definitely a part of what my task was when I visited.
Yeah, so you have kind of a pinpoint of here's where the accident went, and going out from there, right? And then what's released that they can put back into service?
Yes, and so in this, where this particular accident that's coming to mind occurred was right in the middle of an area that was pretty active. It was where the vendors would come and drop things off or pick up materials. So it was high traffic. So having part of that area blocked off while we did the important work of determining what happened for the accident, it's stressful to the operations.
Yeah.
While it's important to figure out what happened, at the same time it can be very hard to work to continue the mining process if the area is too large. So in that instance, I had to stay for multiple days. It's kind of a day-to-day thing. It's MSHA's done when they're done.
Right.
And help them gather documents, talk to the people they wanted to talk to, and ultimately we were able to get the information they needed and get the accident control order lifted in just a few days and keep the area fairly small. But there was a moment where we were really arguing over how that would go, and I think when you're at that moment where you're talking with the regulatory authority, it does help to have somebody there on your side who knows the law, who can quickly respond to surprising interpretations you may hear.
I would imagine. And as you're describing that, I'm kind of picturing, it sounds like when the NTSB comes in to investigate an accident or something like that. So kind of similar.
Yes.
And really, they're looking at every last detail, and and like you mentioned, the interpretations, if if this happened, then perhaps this was what instigated it, or yeah. So I'm going down a rabbit hole now. So let's
Well, a
draw
little
me
bit.
back
I
up.
mean,
But yeah.
yeah, it was in that instance we had an issue with the training too, and what training was
Yeah.
required for visitors.
Oh, I see.
And under the initial interpretation we were being told, until we were able to talk it out with people higher up in the organization, it would have been absolutely crippling to provide the amount of training that the inspectors on the ground were initially wanting to have everyone
Require.
provided.
Yeah.
And then we kind of got cooler heads to prevail, and we were able
Interesting.
to continue to continue on with the work without having to provide every visitor to the site that was delivering.
Yeah, 3 days of
items.
training
Yes.
to deliver a package.
Yes.
Well, that must be really rewarding work, Dana, to be able to be on site and kind of under pressure in some of these cases where you're, determining what works, what happens, what might be risk to workplace safety. It sounds kind of exciting.
It is. It's very dynamic. I mean, those days are always tough,
Mm-hmm.
especially because if there is a serious accident or a fatality, it's
Yeah.
always, there's that component.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
tragic.
these people are, often coworkers,
Yeah.
close coworkers,
Right.
and so there's definitely that emotional component that always need to remember and be sensitive to, but beyond that, I'm there at the site. I'm there during that trying time. But then later, I'm also there to help defend any enforcement that would come from it. And due to being on the ground when it was kind of all occurring, it can be helpful to have really almost firsthand knowledge of what happened, at least during the investigation phase,
Right.
and carry that through depositions and all the way through hearing and appeals if need be.
I'm talking today with Dana Svendsen. She is an occupational safety and health attorney with Sherman Howard, and this is part of our focus this week on mining here on Connect and Collaborate. And we talked about one example of the kind of cases you might find yourself called to. Can you give us some quick other examples, and then before we go to break, once we go to break, we'll talk about
2 minutes.
some more details of working in the safety and regulation side of mining. But what other kinds of cases might come up?
Just regular
Briefly.
citation contests. We talk about the inspections happening at least twice a year. You might receive a citation that says there was a pile of oil underneath this piece of machinery, and it's an accumulation of combustible materials. Here's your enforcement paper, and it might not be all that serious, but when you receive that citation for the 4th time in a row, and you're saying this
gosh.
is not really a hazard because of these other items we have in place, after a while, my clients might want to fight something that just maybe is getting in the way of their ability to do business the way that they think
Day-to-day.
they need to do it.
Yeah.
And so that, that's not quite as exciting as a serious injury or fatality, but that's probably most of my cases, just really helping the mine figure out a way to be in compliance, but also continuing to do business in a safe and healthy manner.
Great. We want to talk more coming up after the break about more concerns, regulations, what the mining industry faces in today's regulatory spectrum. We're talking again with Dana Svendsen, and I think we want to get into a couple of issues, the coal mining activity, how it's growing in terms of exports. We've got a lot of great changes happening in mining here in Colorado. Stay with us. We'll be back with more with Dana Svendsen here on Connect and Collaborate, the voice of the Colorado Business Roundtable. Thanks so much for staying with us today here on Connect and Collaborate. We are focusing on mining in Colorado this week here on the show, and I'm very happy today to be talking with Dana Svendsen. She's an occupational safety and health attorney with Sherman Howard. And Dana, we talked in the last segment about your career, what led you to it. It's all very interesting and just like it's really a fascinating career, and I love kind of your winding path to get there,
Yeah.
But let's talk more about mining. It's really a little bit of a resurgence right now, right? Mining is really important here in Colorado and nationwide.
Yeah, I was
What do we
just
see changing?
I just see a big influx of investment. I was just reading an article in the Wall Street Journal last week. It says world's biggest miners emerge from their hole in $200 billion comeback. That's billion with a B.
Wow.
And the article just went on to say that all the investors are seeing profits on all the mining companies, including BHP Billiton, Rio Tinto, and Anglo American. These are international companies, but they also have a presence in the West and some in Colorado. So it's very exciting to hear that that we're starting to see an influx of money and investment back into mining, because I see that money can also go to fund new ventures, but additionally can be used to solidify existing ventures and beef up their safety and health.
Great. That's great news. And there's also a bump in the coal mining jobs. We see that there was a pretty big downturn in the last. What was that? How long has that been? Has it been in the past decade or just the past few years?
Yeah, just in the past few years, 60,000 coal mining jobs were lost between 2011 and 2016.
Wow.
And the stats show that last year they were able to add 1,000 jobs, and that's a small bump, but considering the trajectory before, it's
headed
very
the right
good
direction.
News. Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I guess that's because again, reading articles, the U.S. is now shipping more coal to Europe and Asia. And in fact, the exports of U.S. thermal coal, which would be the coal that would be used to create electricity or heat homes in Europe and Asia, it rose 117% last year.
Wow.
So that's pretty significant. I think they're getting this coal out of ports in the Gulf.
Oh.
Because there's a lot of pushback to putting a port on the West Coast, which would be ideal to ship to Asia.
Right.
But the industry's sure trying. And
do we know why they're getting coal from the U.S.? Do they not have the resources there, or are there limitations on their mining?
I think there's limitations on their mining. We have excellent high-grade coal in several areas in the United States, including here in Colorado. There's some, as well as nearby to us in the Powder River Basin in Wyoming. Is just full of coal reserves. As long as they're permitted to mine it, it's going to be there for a long time.
Wow. Yeah. There's a lot there. And, I think, like we said, in the past few years, there's been restrictions on mining, or were slowed down and jobs were lost. But we can't really avoid it because, even like you said, they're being exported to Europe and Asia. They're using it for energy. And also, I think you said using it to the met coal that burns nice and hot to help make steel.
Yeah, there's two types of coal. There's the thermal coal, and then there's the metallurgical coal, which is used to make steel. And again, with the boom in building all over the world, met coal prices are remaining at a level that's pretty decent. I know that all the markets are slightly volatile, but I think right now, as far as I understand, those prices are good. And so the mines that have that type of coal, which is very special, are able to produce and make some money. So that's a good thing for the economy.
Absolutely. And as much as we might try to get away from coal, I think that people are looking at renewable resources and things like that. But even when we look at electric cars, they rely on the mining industry to a great extent, not just for the energy that what are you going to plug your electric car into?
This is very true. The electric vehicle sales are actually driving a lot of mining activity in other sectors. Cobalt is an important ingredient in lithium-ion batteries. It's more than doubled in price over the last year. And also the price of nickel, another key ingredient, is up 20%. So everyone is looking to continue to try to mine these items and get them out of the ground so that we can create these electric vehicles and these batteries for alternative energy. I think it's all good, but I think sometimes people forget that when you have that electric car, you're still going to have to plug it in, and that energy source is probably either natural gas or coal.
Coming from a coal plant where you're getting your electricity, right?
Yeah, I guess the stats for this year, in 2016, so I guess a few years back, coal accounted for 30% of U.S. electricity generation, and that compares with nearly 34% for natural gas. So those two items are what's driving heating our homes and driving our economy.
Exactly. Well, and then, as you said, then we've got other countries depending on our coal for their needs as well. When you look at Colorado companies, I think you have some great stories for us for some of the Colorado companies and mines and what they're producing. Hmm?
Yeah, I was able to speak with a few people over the last week. I just kind of said, hey, if I wanted to say something good about what's going on in your world, what would you tell me?
Yeah.
And everyone was great to share information with me. I was able to speak with Nell Wareham with Freeport McMoran, and they are the purveyors of the Climax mine in Colorado here, and they are doing so much to help the community in Colorado and internationally, actually. She had a lot of really interesting things to tell me. They have a program called Freeport in My Community, where they actually allow the community to apply for grants.
Yeah.
Grant funding in different counties. They have a community investment fund where they will give money to the various counties and many grants for education, and also STEM innovation grants and women's development initiatives. And I think that they're one of those companies that really gets it, that you need to get involved in your community and really enhance the community, in addition to just providing the economic stimulus, the jobs, but also just get
Right.
involved at the level of the schools and the hospitals, and make sure the communities are safe and thriving.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you say STEM innovation grants?
Yeah,
So that would be in their communities, really looking at that science, technology, engineering, and math that we need to. We talk about STEM a lot here on this show, but I always want to make sure that people know what it stands for, because I've heard plenty of people go, "Oh, I've not heard of that."
Yeah, when I went through school, it wasn't called STEM yet.
Exactly.
It's a newer term, but yeah, it's a great program they have. And their mine sites are run in a very safe manner. When I was able to do work for them, it was really great. I always felt good about defending them. They're always willing to do extra training for their workers, and I think it's great. Additionally, they have a website. It's called digintimining.com, and it talks about it's basically a partnership with Discovery Education. So pretty slick website. And it talks about how you can use transition metals such as copper, gold, and molybdenum from hybrid vehicles all the way to advances in medical science. So it talks about how these minerals and metals are being used to enhance our daily lives. And so I found that to be very exciting.
That's great. There's so much going on, and great advances, and and these companies too are very, like you mentioned, with Climax Mine, very involved in their communities and making sure there's programs for young people to get educated in those fields as well. So you mentioned Climax Mine, and I know you had a few more you wanted to talk about, some of the great things they're doing.
Yeah, I was able to talk with also a gentleman with Westmoreland Coal. It's they're here. I think they're based out of Canada, but they do have an office here in Denver. They have mines throughout the West and in Texas, and he was telling me about all the safety innovations they've been able to achieve, reducing their injury rate by half, by
Wow.
really looking at data analytics. It was a fascinating discussion of really looking at leading indicators, which are things that you're going to see before you have a serious incident,
Okay.
and measuring them to determine what's really driving the safety incident rate, what's driving the injuries, and trying to get in front of it and prevent it. And it was just a really inspiring talk about all the good things that are going on in the mine industry, and the way we're able to now use data to really try to quantify these amorphous ideas such as safety and compliance.
Right. When you talk about leading they're rushed, or I can imagine there's a lot of things that can play into when you're talking about safety, that there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, a story he told me, which I found it really inspiring. He said, now today, maybe in the past people wouldn't have felt comfortable saying, there's ice on the road here and I'm sliding around, but now it's regularly noted, production is equal to safety.
Yes.
And people are able to know that if they see an unsafe condition, they can report it, and they have all the way down to, your frontline worker. They have stop work authority. An example he gave me was of a person driving a 300-ton haul truck through the mine site. If they run into icy conditions, until those get corrected, they have the authority to stop their route and to make sure that they're not sliding around and causing harm to themselves and others.
Well, and I bet that's a big change, because I mean, very reasonably imagine that there was a time that it's like, no, you keep working until somebody up here says stop, right? So to be able to have that authority to look, this condition does not appear safe to me, and we're going to halt it right here. That's a big shift in authority.
I think it is, and I think it's the way that all my top clients I see running their entities. That's really where I see the future. I mean, another example was a lot of companies now, again with those haul trucks, are implementing safety measures such as cameras that will make sure that your eyes are open and that you're not having micro sleeps while you are driving.
Well,
did you know that was a thing? I didn't know that was a thing until I heard about it, but I guess, think about when you're driving to work and you kind of just zone out for a second.
Yeah, well, or it's a lot like sitting in econ class when you're in college, right? Your head starts to nod.
Yeah.
I can imagine that in micro sleep. That's interesting. I've not heard that term before.
Because people are driving at all hours. You're driving on the night shift. You're it's dark, it's quiet.
Yeah, all kinds of conditions.
Yeah, so some mine operators actually have implement cameras to make sure that their people are awake, and then if they're not, their seat vibrates to wake them up.
Oh wow! Yeah, I was going to say, and what's the next step once you see that they're drifting into microsleep? The vibrating seat. That's great. It's like rumble bars on the highway.
It is, and then if that happens too often, then if it happens multiple times, then you would be pulled off the shift and told to go home and take a nap.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, there's the amount of technology out there to keep people safe it's really inspiring.
That's great. Any other mining companies to speak of?
I was able to speak with Laura Sim. She was recently brought in as a safety professional at the Ure Silver Mine. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. She's very excited to be there. I knew her from when she was at Rio Tinto out in California before.
Wow.
So it's good to see her get moved back here to Colorado. But she was telling me about their safety issues. They're trying to get their mine up and running there, thinking maybe another year to get it up and running. Right now, she said she has 12 employees, and she said her biggest safety issue right now is getting in and out of the mine on the county road that heads up to the mine. It's 7 miles long, and she says it has 10 separate avalanche zones that actually go across the road.
You're kidding. In 7 miles, 10 avalanche zones.
Yeah, because they're up at 10,000 feet.
Sure.
It's
wow.
So it's not that they're having avalanches. It's not that the road is blocked, but it could be if they had the right conditions. So always watching the road, making sure. So the road in and out of the mine is probably her biggest safety concern right now. She said that basically they all come into the mine and leave the mine together, and snow moving equipment is in front of them, in front of their vehicle, as they slowly make their way to and from the mine site. She even said her office is in a avalanche zone, and so the building has a big earthen berm behind it.
My word!
Isn't that crazy?
That is. Look at what these people go through to mine these resources for us, and I can't imagine like throwing avalanche concerns on your list of your daily checklist at work.
Yeah, and she said she's also doing a lot to figure out what are their industrial hygiene concerns, and that's
what does that mean?
Industrial hygiene is so when we talk about OSHA and MSHA, we talk about health and safety. And so safety are those conditions that you have at your site, and then health is also a condition at the site, but it's occupational health. It's exposure to chemicals and toxins and dusts and noise, and it's a whole nother area. There's a whole specialty. You'll hear someone can go to school to become an industrial hygienist, and basically that allows you to analyze all of the toxicology reports and to run the sampling equipment to determine whether or not an employee is overexposed or underexposed or exposed at all to various hazards in the workplace. And say there was a dust hazard, there would be different ways to try to remediate that, including engineering controls or administrative controls, or you can put personal protective equipment on the employee, which would include typically is some sort of respirator. It's a large area, and I'm certainly not an expert, but
Sure.
it's the one that I think is it's top of mind for all my clients, both MSHA and OSHA, because OSHA has recently gone forward, and it's now a final rule. So it's on the books. It's going to be implemented for silica.
Yeah. That's what I was going to mention, as I know we discussed this prior to the show. When you talk about these, whether it's dust or residue or something that can impact the health of the employee. So tell me about the silica concerns.
Well, silica, it's interesting because, OSHA is now enforcing it on construction sites. But you know who else is, even though it's not being, the standard is still as is in the mining industry. Basically, OSHA cut the exposure limit in half. And that's pretty significant. It can really affect, it just brings a lot more people under the umbrella of now having to have an industrial hygiene program and start to watch this type of dust. Silica is one of the most abundant mineral in the Earth's crust. It's everywhere.
Really?
It's everywhere. So if you were working with a quartz type material, a granite type material, you're going to, every time you cut it or move it, you're going to be exposed to dust. And so on construction sites, if you're cutting into any type of stone material, say to make a building, you're making this dust that now OSHA has determined is hazardous at half the level they previously considered it to be hazardous. There's a whole host of ways to comply. You can do your own industrial hygiene sampling to show, hey, my employees aren't exposed, or if they are, you can do an analysis to figure out what would adequately protect them. Or there's this other way to comply that OSHA has in Table 1, and it's a brand new thing they're doing to kind of say, hey, well, if you don't have an industrial hygienist and you don't want to go through all of this, if you are doing certain activities, you can just wear a respirator and you'll be good.
Okay.
And very simplified way to describe it. It's a way for them to try to work with those smaller companies that may not have the resources to do industrial hygiene, but it has its pitfalls.
Yeah.
So
a lot to be concerned about in those regulations. Definitely you want to keep the workers safe and give them the tools and what's the word I'm looking for? But like a respirator type thing to keep them safe. But yeah, like you said, if it's a smaller company, they might not have the financial resources to cover all of that. So there has to be some working with everybody.
Yeah, and it's all very preliminary. OSHA its enforcement for the construction silica standard I haven't seen any yet. So we'll see how that goes. It just started this fall. So and I heard from their occupational their compliance assistant specialist, one of the their client compliance people that isn't doing enforcement, that right now there's no program actually in place for them to implement any silica inspections as of right now. So the only way that they're likely to issue any enforcement is if there actually is a complaint.
Okay.
So that's maybe somewhat of a relief to industry right now.
Right. So it sounds like they're working kind of ahead of the problem, so they at least have some answers for when the questions come up.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I was able to attend a meeting last week with mining entities that were interested in hearing this occupational compliance assistant specialist speak. He spoke to the mines, and you think
great.
First step, you're like, why would the mines want to hear about what OSHA is doing for silica? And I can tell you they're very concerned. They're the ones that are actually taking the silica-containing material out of the earth.
Right.
And they're concerned that the exposure standard for MSHA will also be reduced by half. And if that happens, they're going to have some logistical problems in continuing to mine in the methods that they're currently mining, because they may not be able to reach those levels with the current methods.
Right.
You know, every company, you know, in mining is already doing these industrial hygiene samples and determining whether or not their people need to be wearing respirators or engineering controls. But it's certainly concerning. 'Cause, I mean, cutting the level in half, that's just a whole nother hurdle to meet.
Yeah, definitely.
So there was a lot of people at the meeting with the OSHA compliance assistant specialist wanting to ask questions, thinking, you know, we're regulated by MSHA right now, but who's to say that MSHA won't put something similar on the books and we'll have to comply. So a lot of interest in the area of silica regulation.
You have to stay on top of a lot of these changes and regulations to make sure that you can help all of the mining companies, you know, meet their whatever the regulations or expectations are.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I kind of love it, so it's okay.
I can tell you do. I can tell you do, and that's what's really exciting is when you find out about a new regulation, you want to read up on it and find out how it might impact the people you serve.
Yeah. There's really been, you know, it's been somewhat quiet on the regulatory front, I would say overall, but MSHA did get a new assistant secretary. His name is David Zatazalo. Oh my goodness. Zatazalo. Zatazalo?
That sounds good.
Yeah. So I've heard somebody pronounce his name. It's Italian, and it sounds really pretty when you pronounce it properly, and I'm butchering it. So
it's hard when there's a lot of letters just in a row there, and you haven't heard it said aloud.
But he was able to speak earlier this month to basically a House subcommittee on workforce protections, and he gave a lot of clues about how he's going to be regulating the community. One thing that really stood out was that he did announce that he has no plans to roll back any portion of MSHA's coal mine respirable dust rule, and that's another industrial hygiene standard where the current level of exposure was cut in half, and that happened right at the end of the Obama administration. So a lot of coal mines have been struggling to comply, but so far I really haven't heard anything where people just can't make it happen. So I think so far MSHA has been able to work with regulated community on that one.
Does it sound like some of those regulatory changes are they in place to some degree to really help the mining industry keep their employees safe, or are some of these regulations restrictive to just make it harder to operate?
You know, there's a lot of talk that some of it might be restrictive, but I think at this point, I think the people with MSHA believe they're doing the right thing to keep people safe, and the last thing we want to see is any miners with black lung. Exactly.
Yeah, there's been like so many dangers in the past, and I think we're really coming a long way. And we appreciate, Dana Svendsen, your work as I got to find your title back here, the safety and health attorney with Sherman Howard. You're working with all of the mining industry here in Colorado, and we appreciate what you're doing. And thanks for giving us this update.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, happy to have you. That's Dana Svendsen. If you want to find out more, you can re-listen to this episode in our podcast at cobrt.com, where you'll also find a live stream video.